so good afternoon. I'm Stephen Bates. I work for Chevron Phillips Chemical. I've been with CP Chem about 10 years. I started at our Baytown plant, Cedar Bayou. We're a petrochemical company, so we make plastic and other derivative petrochemicals. So a brief history on CP Chem and how we've used APM, or formerly known as Meridium. We're a legacy customer. We've used it at some sites for over 20 years. And this is kind of, I'll say that reliability digital enablement effort started as a project, as an initiative, but it really is intended to be more of a programmatic change. And so we'll talk through some of those elements. We're going to talk about what we would call our reliability pillars. So this is probably the first divergence. Like any customer, we have our own way of talking about reliability. That's supposed to be institutionalized so that we have a common language, but that can be a little hard to follow in the product roadmap. So if you have questions on where does this pillar fit and kind of which of those, we can kind of map that out. But I mentioned we started over 20 years ago with this product. We've used it primarily for integrity. So I'm going to cover the basics and we'll dive right in. This was the objective of the project. I am the project manager for the Reliability Digital Enablement Project. It covers our 11 manufacturing facilities across the globe. Most of those are here in Texas, but we have facilities in Belgium, the Middle East, and in Singapore. So if you had a kind of locational, we've done a lot of traveling over the past year or so. And these are our objectives. So the first one is pretty simple. Don't break our integrity program. And I can say with confidence, that's been very successful. So we were on version 3.6, and again, that's kind of our past. Is we are very slow to change. We've been on-premise and still are, just to be upfront. But those are things that we needed to consider what's the future going forward without forgetting the history we've come from. And that's really the second bullet is how do we improve in our reliability journey? So we've gone through many benchmark studies and we've seen all the results and said internally and both from those benchmarks realize there's a huge opportunity when it comes to unplanned lost pounds and lost profit opportunity, right? So you don't make pounds, you don't make money because you can't sell the product. And that was the target. So we kind of broke that out into these three pillars. So I'll just kind of speak to these. It's pretty simple. We're not reinventing anything, but we're kind of using our own language. So the first pillar we've identified is really equipment criticality-based strategies. So we look at, is this equipment critical to operations or maintenance for certain reasons? Does it have a bigger impact on our environmental footprint, or is there a safety concern perhaps? So this transcends all equipment disciplines, but we started with criticality and strategy on our rotating machinery. So I think that's key. I mentioned our integrity, that's our foundation. That's really covering a lot of our fixed equipment assets. So we're not going to focus on that. Really the pillars was where we expanded our footprint and tried to make some changes both culturally and just programmatically. How do we manage these things as a company? So we used corporate developed strategies. We used a defined criticality matrix. So again, nothing new, but we took the effort and the time. And there are some folks that have been at this conference that have contributed to doing over 10,000 assets of criticality and strategy applications. So that's a big effort, and we'll kind of talk about where the product engages with that next. Then our other pillar is failure identification and elimination. This is also known as a bad actor program. So how do we learn from our past, make sure if we've had a failure that caused us to come down or reduce rates, something like that, we can learn from that, make sure we're doing a proper root cause analysis, and not just at a site level or a unit level. I mentioned we have 11 manufacturing sites. We want to learn across the globe, and this helps, again, institutionalize even those failure modes that we've been troubled with. Maybe it's a centrifugal compressor, and it's having a similar failure history, but if I'm at one site and I only have 3 of these compressors versus another site that has a set of 3, we want to take those learnings and combine them, right? So that's just one example. Our third pillar is equipment health monitoring. And this is, again, as you can imagine, just trying to synthesize all that operational data, vibration data, combine that with a simple way for a reliability engineer to look at and say, what's my health currently? And then more importantly, we've introduced kind of a concept that we want to look at as a cumulative health. So how do I trend this history of health over time and make sure during my next major outage that I learn what's the scope, what's appropriate for this asset. So that's our 3 reliability pillars. Again, it makes up our equipment reliability program, and it's built on that foundation. So it's very simple, keeping these things standardized. We've been an enterprise solution, so we have the benefit coming from version 3.6 that was already rolled out. But I don't want to take that for granted. That took a lot of effort to get there. But culturally, people were used to, okay, if I do it at this site, it's going to be very similar at a counter site. And we can kind of crosstalk when we have those discussions. And with that, you can derive governance and specific KPIs. That's another value we've had as a company. I think I was asked recently, what's some of the metrics and KPIs you've used? We've been using them since we did an enterprise rollout in 2014. So whether it's a compliance metric or it's just a reliability, how well are we managing one of these pillars, we can report that up to our senior leadership and so on. And then again, looking towards the future, probably most particularly that third pillar requires a lot more IT infrastructure. I think in the last discussion, it was pretty clear cybersecurity is just one of many things you might deal with, or how do you make sure all these different applications that monitor vibration, are they all in the same version? Are they all in the same network? What are the firewall requirements? That's all parts of the puzzle. And so how do we start looking towards a data lake solution, or how do we start thinking about cloud computing in a way that's going to apply and build a architecture, not just for this digital tool, but also for others. So we were a catalyst in that for our company. So let's dive in a little bit on equipment strategy. And again, this is kind of from 2 years ago. So this is where we were. And I mentioned rotating machinery, critical motors. That's really where we had been for several years. We had these corporate derived strategies living in Excel. And I can tell you, most sites said, we've done this. Give us the green light, we're good, right? And that's fair. I think most sites did go through the exercise. They tried to apply those strategies, but as we can all imagine, when you're just trying to take a strategy and then you open up SAP and change a PM, there's not a lot of rigor, not a lot of continuity that carries that forward. And same with our operator round system, or if we had a vibration round system, how do we know that we've closed that loop and really implemented a good strategy? So that's where we've been. The first step is really getting that loaded into APM. And that's what we called, well, not that part. The strategy development in APM is really good because you can use templates and you can apply those, whether it's at a class level, all the way down to I want to fine-tune sub-strategies. I want to have a strategy around just my lubricating systems or my seal plans. So that's really helpful in developing it. But our item 2 years ago, which I think for us has been addressed, but was around how do we implement that, not just for SAP, because I think obviously the product covers that really well, but for operator rounds, for our operating historians, where we want to add a tag, how do we make sure we track that to implementation? So we configured a solution, but I do think there's an opportunity as we look at APIs and other extensibility, how do we crosstalk between these applications and make sure if I have a strategy action that says you need to have a pressure tag that you're trending over time and you're monitoring that I can actually go to that system and take credit for it, right? Versus trying to just say, yeah, I've claimed victory, right? That can be a false sense of security if we're not getting that system to system robust. So along with the development of the strategies and implementing them, we do also want to make sure we reanalyze that. And so again, APM shines in this. You can go make a revision to a strategy. This is something that is really helpful over the life of an asset. You can kind of figure, well, today this is high criticality. Today these are our maintenance practices or our operating round practices, but maybe those will get more sophisticated. So we're not there yet, but setting the stage, maybe we introduce a new technology for operators that allows them to be more effective in what they do. And that's just a audio-visual olfactory inspection, but they actually have more digital tools that they're going to use. And so this would fit right in there. Okay, let's update our strategy and revise that and continue to implement that through those systems. So our next pillar around failure identification elimination really is, I would say, something we have done in version 3 and had great success. Again, bad actors is a common cross-industry topic. Everybody wants to know what are the things that are costing me both operating expense as well as my maintenance dollars, right? So if I'm just going to go replace these assets, what am I learning from that? Am I actually going to prevent this failure from happening again? Where am I going to take that learning and apply it other places? So this framework really did ingest our SAP maintenance work history, It looks at our lost production events that we track on a daily and monthly basis, but it lets you zoom out and say, okay, as I continue to see those events happening, am I taking this improvement candidate and picking the right assets, or maybe it's at a whole area of the plant where we're having this same issue. We can kind of keep those ideas, those issues as opportunities right front and center. And if we hit a threshold of this is what we would call a bad actor, it's costing us this much maintenance dollars or this much unplanned lost pounds, let's go ahead and manage that really as more like a project, if you will. So we take those bad actors, we can now report those, we know the value because we've kind of done the due diligence with those individual events and rolled it up into a specific bad actor. We also might consider, I don't want this to be reported up through the ranks, I just want it to be tracked over time. This is where I've created a reliability event. So these are, again, things that didn't exist in the product. I didn't mention, as we've gone through our upgrade journey, we're in version 5, about to go to 5.1.2. Obviously, this is a custom table. That's allowed. With our on-premise, we do have some custom code that helps us make it more of a seamless user experience. So again, we'll talk about kind of a summary of these slides, but this was an area we saw as an opportunity for us and maybe other customers, right? We don't really start with a root cause analysis necessarily. We might want to start with, here's what we're seeing in the maintenance data, whether it's rework or unplanned work. Let's take that concept and slowly build it into a bigger idea of this is truly a bad actor and I can go after the dollar values, whether it's production or maintenance. So, and obviously in this process, you might find things you don't actually need to address, and that's part of a rejection. So equipment health monitoring, I kind of alluded to it, but one of the challenges, as we've already heard, and I'll reiterate, is getting the data into a central location. And for us, we had some stipulations that this needed to go to a central CP Chem repository, a data lake. So we called it our enterprise data platform, partly because we're not the only ones that want to see that pressure and temperature transmission. We have environmental groups that are trying to monitor things, process monitoring groups that are trying to utilize that same data. So this was a way for us to kind of consolidate efforts and improve that, make it more of a, hey, I need to consume this, let me go to the data lake and pull that back. But as you can tell, we did identify there's an opportunity, and that's, again, related to APIs, which if you weren't here earlier this week, that's going to be addressed. But at the time of this, it was still pretty new, and so we did have to go after a custom solution for that. But what is the work process? So let's keep it focused on that. If I look at my operator around data, my operating temperatures, pressures, flow, if I look at my vibration data, right now, if I look at one system at a time, I might get a picture of what's the health of the asset, but better than that, let's put it through some policies that sort of can calculate the efficiency on demand. They can actually tell me if my lubrication system as a whole is really trending the right direction, or if I need to do some mitigations to address some risk. And again, that's what we would use the APM policies. That's been really successful. It's not always as user-friendly as I'm a mechanical engineer. It might not be easy for me to do, but we definitely have folks that we've worked with that have been able to build those out. So it's very accessible, and it's continuing to improve, so that's a really good sign. So where do those policy events land us? We use a dashboard to manage both active alerts, things that have kind of met our threshold. This is trending too high, or we're getting too low of a pressure here. We actually use a dashboard that says, okay, you've got this asset. Here's sort of the paradigm you're following. Go ahead and acknowledge that alert just like you would in the traditional health module. But then as those continue over time, we kind of calculate, well, how long was this in alert? How long was this actually telling me there's something wrong before we were able to bring it back into scope? That's where our cumulative health comes in. And so we have a dashboard at the top is things that are current, and then at the bottom it's over time, what's been my health? So we'll just kind of calculate. It's a simple calculation, but we break it down and it allows us to say for mechanical train, for operating efficiency, for lubrication, here's how well we've been performing. And then when the turnaround group inevitably comes and says, what do we need to do on this centrifugal compressor? Maybe we've done some on-stream washes and the fouling isn't as bad because the data is driving us towards doing that earlier. And when turnaround comes, we're doing a limited scope or a partial scope, right? So that's an example where at least it's a data-driven decision rather than, let me go look and study this and look at all the historical data and I'll get back to you with an answer. No, we can kind of see at a glance. Now there's still validation that occurs, but for our facilities, again, a lot of each individual site has to manage this for their unit. They don't have a lot of additional time, and there's opportunities for them to continue looking forward towards the future. So it's a cultural change for us. Is let's not just look at the near past and the I'll say back to the last turnaround. Let's actually get a bigger picture of that, and then start looking at it going forward. So you can see policies are very flexible and can be very well supplemented by other technologies like AI, right? So maybe it's actually a different kind of event that comes up and says, we're predicting a bearing failure in the next 3 to 6 months. Okay, that's something to consider. If we take action, increase our lubrication on the bearings, maybe we'll catch that. But this is definitely our more adventurous foray into what we mentioned, the data lake, as well as oftentimes these silos get pretty divisive, right? So operations says, well, I'm hitting production rates, I'm getting the right output, don't ask me to run this machine any less. And the reliability team's saying, we're seeing a lot of issues. You can't say for sure you haven't hit a hard alarm, that's not what we're talking about, but we're seeing trends and we need to take action. So a lot of those conversations just become more collaborative, and even on this, I'll just make a quick comment. In the past year that we've been rolling out to version 5, we've had a significant cost savings event that was detected by this, that because of policies that we were able to run very frequently, the process monitoring group, the operations groups have said, we really would like to see this for more and more of our assets. So I think that tells at least that there's been a quick win without us obviously planning. It wasn't like, oh yeah, let's go find the worst equipment and tell them how bad it is. It's more like they thought this machine was running well, and turns out they started to see a decline in efficiency. So again, that's a big success in our minds, that we're going to continue to see things like that, because it's hard to do asset by asset management when I've got a lot of other assets that are coming up and work that needs to be managed, and there's more day-to-day things for our engineers right now. So this was kind of a summary just of what we had expected and what we feel like we got results-wise. It does include a couple of the integrity pieces, just because I think there has been some really good alignment on all these product areas, and some that were able to be adopted early, some that are going to come in the end of this year, and some that I think we continue to want to get alignment on. I'll just give a big shout out to the GE team that's really worked hard to meet us where we are. Obviously, they have a lot of customers, but we've definitely felt like our voice has been heard. And so if you haven't been part of those customer groups and you're interested, I'd highly recommend it. The product management and engineering team has done a really good job working with us. So I'll include that shameless plug. So let's just talk about the specifics. So equipment, strategy, reconciliation. This is, again, one of those details. We have a robust requirement to say every time we change a strategy, we want to know who did it and why. So they have a comment. But the process itself takes a couple of clicks. And so if I want to do this on a whole unit level or a whole site level, it is quite a bit time consuming to try and use a family data loader. And again, we're kind of getting the weeds, but we had to build a custom data loader solution for that. So that's kind of an ongoing management as we add more assets like electrical or instrumentation. This would be something we would need to continue to see. However, you'll notice I said partially fulfilled. There's a huge, I'll say, improvement on the bulk data form from the strategy review. So instead of just trying to look at 2 long lists of items, you can kind of see all your actions right there on one screen. You can pick and choose. Okay, if it's a PM on the seals, okay, that's going to go to our CMMS, SAP, or EAM. If it's an operator round, that obviously is going to go to my operator rounds application. So that's, again, met us halfway. We would like to see continued alignment on that. And I think we're getting closer, but again, for other customers in the room, kind of pretending like GE's not here, your voice really matters. So continue to talk with me, but the product managers are the ones who help guide that as well. So we want to band together as customers. That's really what I'm saying. So bad actor work process. This was, again, it started with, this is where we think the product is going, but in the end, it didn't work out. And so it's a custom table. I mentioned that earlier. It's just something we've configured. So at this point, it's not an issue for us today because we are on-prem, but that'll be something to consider going forward. So equipment health monitoring, I do believe there's a lot of feature enhancements, and it kind of ties with that bottom piece. We've been able to make it work. Scalability is really human dependent because we have so many different ways we want to manage the efficiency calculations or policies that they're not just, add this and this and you get that value. It's sometimes very complex and you're kind of doing more process monitoring. And so we're trying to find the balance between, we really just want to know, is the process efficiency good or not good? And if it's trending up or trending down versus I got to go calculate all the molecular compositions of the stream, right? So there's a difference in kind there. But from the product standpoint, I think there's a lot of promise. There's opportunities, but I think we're aligned, and it's not quite on the roadmap, or if it is, it's set as future consideration. But I think those conversations will continue to go. So talk about risk-based inspection planning. Yep, that was a success. I would say we got that as soon as we went into version 5. It was pretty necessary for our work process. And I think, again, there's ways you can use all these different integrity modules. There's a lot of content that we can build as customers. And so this really helped us avoid having to kind of go through a lot of little rabbit holes and get to where we really needed to be. If you're not familiar with RBI inspection planning, you can come ask me. I won't bore the whole audience, but that's been a really big success for us. RBI in and of itself is very valuable to our company, and so that was really helpful. Speaking of inspections, that work process had a lot of pitfalls where we kind of wanted things to consider remaining life, right? Half remaining life for internal inspections, or maybe we want to do a deferral on a task. Again, those are things that are coming, and so we've had really good alignment. The downside is we're on-prem, and so the 5.2 release that's coming later this year, we'll have to kind of plan. So that's just something we've had to consider. Is we love everything when we first rolled out, starting last May, but the timing doesn't always work out. So work management interface, I didn't really drill down on this, but this is kind of one of the product modules we hadn't used a lot before. We used it to send notifications to SAP, but we're kind of expanding that definition. And so we were able to configure that. And I think going forward, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Again, we've kind of got confidence, but it was highly configured. So anytime you do a lot of work on something and it's not really baked into the product, we just make note of that, right? And it's just something to keep an eye on, because when any upgrades come up, we'll have to test those things, which is worthwhile to us, but that's just for what it's worth. So continued areas that we'll just highlight. I talked about the bottom one APIs, just so that we have extensibility, ins and outs of the application, but also from version 3, if you've never used it, and you've only been in version 4 or version 5, there's certain things that we became very accustomed to, and that's hard to change. So I'll just kind of leave you, this is our list of things, but where are we today? This is the impact, right? And I would say, as nitpicky as we can be, this has been still a really well-received effort. We've gotten, I mentioned, the value out of at least 2 or 3 of these pillars pretty much day one, along with continuing our asset integrity journey. So again, all these things considered, we've helped redefine roles, and that's an ever-changing process. There's going to be new learnings probably every time somebody comes into a role and leaves that role, but that's worthwhile, again, because it's a standard approach, right? So we're not trying to say, okay, find your own way, use your own spreadsheet, build your own database. It's very clear. You can use this to do your work on a day in and a week out basis. And then again, we're kind of looking at how do we make sure we're not just considering a site-by-site approach, but the policies that govern us as a company. We call it our central engineering group. There's SMEs that are rotating experts. I'm not a rotating expert. There's some folks that have a hand in all of the governance side, and this gives them the visibility to say, okay, if we want to change some of our corporate policies, or even at a site level, we can work on the specifics. So having that as part of one platform really does change that. And for reliability, it's not a one-size-fits-all, and sometimes where we draw the line on what's acceptable can be, somewhat flexible, but at least we know we're going to use the same approach. So kind of the last piece that I didn't start with, but we are doing an S4 HANA upgrade now. So that's, I think, a common thread I've heard from many customers, that's part of maybe a reason to upgrade to a compatible version. This obviously meets that. We've done all of our testing to make sure we're going to be covered, but that's something to consider, is that for us on the on-prem, we still had to go through a lot of those rigors and make sure it worked, and it's very well aligned. Our last piece, I think I've kind of touched on it, but having the ability to bring KPIs both to leadership as well as down to the operator, engineer, analyst level, I think really helps. It sells the story. So rather than just say, oh, it's helping us make better decisions, we'll say, here's the decisions that your team has already been making. What do you think about that? And we can really pull them in. I'll just talk about one more UI UX thing for us. We were using a Citrix portal to get to version 3. So everybody's been saying, oh, it's so much easier to use a web-based client. But again, this is a small thing for CP Chem that kind of really became part of our stakeholder, all the users, practitioners really appreciated. So I think considering those things, again, we have our sort of product roadmap items that we would love to see. I think we've had great success, and we're going to continue to get value out of this.